Well, here we are. To be honest, at first I perceived him as something like that. But I guarantee that by the end of the course this interface will be much friendlier for you. The road will be mastered by the walking one, so let's not waste time. Let's get started. It all starts with creating a composition. We will consider this your blank sheet of paper. The first thing we can do is give a name to the composition. Knowledgeable uncles advise you to always sign them. When there are about 50 of them in the project, then you will understand the importance of this case. Next on the list is the resolution and frame rate, FPS. That's why there are already a bunch of ready-made presets here. Conventional industry standard, Full HD, well, 25 frames per second. Basically, such FPS goes to the TV, or 30 frames per second. Such FPS is usually done in the role as for the internet. The word FPS has already become familiar, but if in games this value can jump depending on the performance of your computer, then it is standardized in the graph. In a nutshell, everything came from the film industry. The first value was taken from the calculation of the length of the film and the convenience of counting the material taken on it. That is, a certain number of frames occupied a certain length on a physical film. Since in those days there was a person who turned this film and thereby could influence the speed of playback of the film. And a lot of people were going to the cinema, some unscrupulous distributors paid this guy extra, and he started turning this handle a little faster. And since the films were played faster, it means that it was possible to spend more sessions on this film. Well, it is clear that not only the psyche of the viewer, but also the dramaturgy suffered from this, of course. Imagine if a person falls in a rapid, then this is of course a drama, and if in an accelerated form, this is already a comedy. In short, here are the standards for you so that you don't mess around. Specifically in Motion design, the purity of frames affects the smoothness of what is happening. But, of course, you should not get carried away, although you do not need to buy additional bobbins with film. I usually create compositions with a purity of 25 frames. But in principle, 30 frames is also nothing. It will roll. Let's move on to the next important setting. This is the duration of our composition. The first value in our tab is just our frames. As we remember, we have 25 frames in 1 second. Accordingly, we can change these values from 0 to 25. The next value is seconds. We usually operate with seconds in small works, like if we need to animate some logo, maybe create some kind of transient or some kind of interruption. Then we have minutes already, which is logical. In minutes, we create maybe some explainers, or maybe a design for some show, and so on. And finally, for the giants of thought, the author of the effect provided for the ability to create compositions in watches. But I hasten to upset you, the maximum duration of such a composition can be 3 hours. Let me try to put, for example, 7 o'clock here and see that the author does not deceive the effect. It shows 3 hours maximum. Okay, let me change the value again to 0 hours and put 7 seconds. For this lesson, such a long composition will be enough for us behind our eyes. Cool. That's all for now with this window. Click OK and we see that such a black rectangle has appeared in the center of our author effect. This is our preview window. Here the author effect will show us cartoons. Naturally, those that we ourselves will create. Next, if we move to the left side of the screen, we will see that our first composition has appeared in the Project tab. The Project tab will store all our objects, which we will drag to the author effect. Let it be videos, pictures, maybe some PSD files or AI files. Also, our first composition automatically opened in our workspace. Here she is. All the objects that we create or drag into it will appear in the left part of our workspace. And the right part. This is our timeline, that is, the timeline. Here we will have layers displayed and already here we will work directly with the keys. I think we have also dealt with this a little bit. Let's try to throw an effect into the author that you can twist and move. I originally wanted to throw a spinner, but I was told that spinners are no longer fashionable, so let's throw a wheel, no matter how ambiguous it sounds. In order to throw something into the author effect, there are several ways. The first is that you can go to the topmost corner, find the File tab and select the import line. Here you can select a file and, accordingly, find the file you need and click Import. I most often use another way. I just collapse the author effect, look for the object I need and drag it into the program. You can throw it into the project window, or you can immediately move it to the workspace. As we can see, when we released our object on the workspace, it automatically appeared in the project window, which is also super convenient in principle. Now our picture is called a layer. Each layer always has the same tab that allows you to edit this layer. If we click on the check mark, we see the Transform tab. It just stores the main editing parameters. Let's click on the triangle opposite the masonry and these settings will be revealed to us. The main settings for animation are, so to speak, three main whales. This is the position that is responsible for the location of our object inside the composition position on the x-axis and position on the y-axis. Next comes the Scale tab, which means scale or size. If we change the value, we will see that we are increasing or decreasing the size of our layer. It can also be noted that only the scale has such a lock, or these are the links of the chain. And if we remove this lock by clicking on it, then we will be able to change the size of our layer disproportionately. Now, let's say I can crumple our wheel a little. In general, I think you understand the essence of what is happening. Okay, I'll put that check mark back. The next important thing is, of course, the turn. We can change the rotation value in degrees. I think everything is clear and simple here too. If we make a full revolution, that is, 360 degrees, then the author of the effect will show us that once we made a revolution around its axis. And, accordingly, it is also sometimes convenient to animate large values without turning the slider here, but simply changing the value of the number of revolutions around its axis. Everything is also clear. The next tab we have is Opacity. It is responsible for the transparent layer. If we decrease the percentage value here, we will increase the transparency of our layer. We see that our wheel is sort of dissolving. We will definitely work with this tab, too, and of course we will find a use for it. The last parameter I would like to talk about is the first in this list. I purposely left it for last, because it has a number of important settings. This parameter is called Anchor Point. Anchor Point is responsible for the centers of our layer. If you go to the preview window and look at the center of the wheel, we will see that there is such a small cross there. This is our anchor. During the course, we will often rearrange it somewhere, so I will now tell you about one tool that allows you to edit this anchor point. It is located in our toolbar in the toolbar and looks like such a fashionable site. If we click on it and return to our anchor, we will see that now we can pick it up and change its position in space. Why is this even necessary? Well, not always. For example, we need to rotate our object relative to the center. Let's say we want to rotate our wheel relative to this point. We transfer the anchor point here and now by changing the rotation value, we will see that our wheel rotates relative to this anchor point itself. Well, also, for example, if we change the scale now, then our object will also change relative to this point. In general, the thing is as cool as possible and, as I said before, we will use it quite often. What else can be said about anchor point editing? For example, if we press Ctrl on the keyboard and start dragging our anchor point, it will stick to the main points of our layer. It will also stick to the center of the layer, which is very convenient and often used. Plus, I also want to say that if we change the numerical parameters of our anchor point in the Transformation tab, then not the anchor point itself will move, but our layer relative to the anchor point. As we can see, our cross itself remains motionless. By the way, this can also be used for animation. Of course, we will also talk about this further. But I think that's probably all. We talked about the most basic transformation settings. Let me go back to our toolbar, and select Selection tool. It's time to go directly to the most important thing, namely our animation. That's what we're here for. Let's say we want to animate our wheel so that it moves from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen, of course without using the cursor. To do this, I will place the wheel at the initial point and proceed to the transformation settings. We will animate the position value. In order to put the first key, we need to click on this watch. In general, it's more like a stopwatch, but it's much easier to pronounce the watch. So I click on the watch and thereby put our first key. Here he appeared here in the form of such a thrombus. Next, we need to decide how long our wheel will manifest from the left edge to the right. Let's say it will be 2 seconds. Move our slider to the value of 2 seconds. The slider can not only be moved, but you can click the mouse and as we see it will jump to the place where we clicked the mouse. After we have selected the value we need, we go back to the position settings and change the value along the x-axis so that our wheel moves to the desired point. As we can see, the author of the effect realized that the values had changed relative to the first key and automatically gave us a new key, which is cool, because we don't need to press anything else anymore. Now let's return the slider to the first key and press the space bar to watch our animation. Cool, everything works. Our wheel traveled the distance we needed without even spinning. Magic, that's all. Let's talk a little bit about ways to reproduce our animation. There are 2 ways to do this. As I said earlier, you can press the space bar on the keyboard, but the nuance of this method is that the animation will be played from the place where our slider is located. Let's say I move for 1 second and press the space bar and the animation will go from the place of this marker. The second way is to use the 0 button on the keyboard numpad. Unfortunately, there is no keyboard under my laptop, as it is slightly shortened, but you can use this method. One of the advantages of this method is that the animation will start from the beginning of the workspace selection. What is a workspace? These are these blue brackets on top of all our layers. It can be edited, thereby limiting the duration of our playback. Let's try to edit this very workspace. You can simply hold down the left mouse button and drag the bracket to the value we need. Let's say 2 seconds. Now by pressing 0 or space, our animation will be played only on the selected interval. A convenient thing, we will use it often to view our animations. Okay, we've dealt with that. Let's go to the preview window. By the way, in order to move our preview window like this, you need to hold down the mouse wheel and a hand will appear that allows you to move the window to where we need it. Also, this hand is here. You can select it and perform exactly the same actions. Plus, you can zoom in or out of our preview window also using the mouse wheel. Okay, after we have reanimated the value by position, the author effect creates for us this way. It serves as a visual assistant to what we have reanimated in which direction our object is moving. It also has some useful features. Let's talk about them. Well, first of all, the ending of the path is our final key. If I move the wheel a little bit, we will see that at the beginning we also have such a square. It symbolizes our first key. This is understandable. If you get a little closer, you can see these points. These points show the speed of movement of our object. Since our keys that we put are called linear and the wheel moves constantly at the same speed, then there is the same distance between these points everywhere. Let's talk about this a little further. If we look closely, there are points like this on the left and right. In fact, these are not points, but tendrils that allow you to edit the path of the trajectory along which our object is moving. Let me grab one of them and pull it somewhere, like down. I'll go back to the first key and pick up this tendril here in the same way and pull it up somewhere. We have created such a trajectory. If we play the animation, we will see that our wheel is now moving not along a straight line, but along such an undulating trajectory. In general, it's cool, because we didn't put any additional keys. We still have 2 keys, but the animation is already much more complex than just moving in a straight line. Let me take our values back a couple of steps. To do this, you can click Ctrl-Z, Ctrl-Z. Once again, Ctrl-Z. In fact, Ctrl-Z. This is the cancellation of the action. If you clicked once again, then you can click Ctrl-Shift-Z and it will cancel the cancellation of the action. This option is also used quite often, so remember. In order to show one nuance, I will now expand our working area, say, to 3 seconds, and at the 3rd second I will change the trajectory of the wheel in some direction. Let's say I send him down somewhere. Okay, now if we zoom in, we will see that our wheel is moving along a small rounding. This happens because initially automatically the author of the effect creates these points of movement along the path with the ability to edit Bezier curves. If anyone does not know, there was such a peasant Bezier who engineered machines and to create more optimal and smooth shapes came up with the Bezier curve, which essentially smooths the angles of the lines between the control points and makes it possible to create curves, not such curves. Go ahead, doodle. We don't always need our object to move smoothly somehow, so there is an option to edit these points in the author effect. If we go to the pencil tool, hold down the left mouse button, here we will select the vertex chair envelope. We can use it to change our key points. Let's click on one of them. As we can see after the click, this angle has ceased to be smooth and has become sharp. Who was engaged in illustration or did something in Photoshop plus or minus understands how it works. By clicking on this key again, we will be able to return our form to editing along the meringue curve again. Well, I think that's probably all. These are the main points of editing the position of the object. Let me roll back again. I'll leave 2 keys, well, and adjust the workspace again for 2 seconds. Let's now talk about the types of keys. In this case, these are the simplest keys, they are linear. That is, the speed of moving an object between these keys, as I have already said, is uniform, the same. These types of keys are well suited for animating something mechanical, such as gears. But in most cases we need a more charismatic and more expressive animation. To do this, we have such a key called Easy From. In our country, it was called the soft key. Let's try to put such a key and see what changes in the animation. And for that, I'll move on to the second key. I will select our linear key, right-click on it, and in the key assistant I will select From. Also, if you do not support your head with your left hand and you have it free, then you can press F9 on the keyboard, which will give exactly the same effect. Let's replay our animation and see what has changed. As we can see, now our wheel is moving non-linearly. At the beginning, the speed of the wheel is higher, and the closer the animation comes to an end, the lower the animation speed. The wheel seems to slow down a little bit. This is cool in itself, but even cooler is the fact that we can adjust the speed of this very breaking. To do this, there is such an icon in the author effect, which reveals the editor graph. You need to make sure that the necessary key is highlighted and click this icon. After pressing this button, such a curve appears to our eyes. If suddenly it looks different for you, go to this icon and make sure that the checkmark is opposite Edith's speed count. Okay, in general, this curve clearly demonstrates the speed of movement of our object. Slight acceleration. Here the object has the maximum speed, and the further the animation is played, the speed becomes slower and not slower. Also here we see such antennae, on the one hand, on the other hand. And if we pull, for example, the right one and change our schedule in this way, then our animation will change. As we can see, the fact that we have such a peak, where the speed is generally super, and then the speed drops to zero for a long time. Let me hit play and see what came of it. In general, you can compare all these three animations and see clearly how different they are. Graphics are a very cool tool to customize your animation in more detail. We will use them often, and I think you will get used to them quickly. In fact, there is nothing complicated about this. To return to our keys again, you need to click the graph editor icon again, and we return directly to the keys. Let's try to make the first key soft too. I'll press F9 and go back to our charts again. We can see that he has changed a little. We have a longer acceleration, maximum speed, and also speed attenuation. You can somehow edit, experiment and get another animation option. Let's play it. In general, using only two keys and using graphs, we can already create many variations of our animation. It's fun. In the future, by and large, we will work with this. Our task is to learn to understand timings and get used to such manipulations. What else is worth knowing about these soft keys? Let's say after my will reached the final point, I wanted to send it somewhere else. I changed its position, and as we can see automatically, the author of the effect put exactly the same key. As we remember, after we put a linear key, the author of the effect automatically puts a linear key to us. After we put a soft key, automatically the author of the effect puts us exactly the same soft key. Let's remember this moment. I will delete the new key and change these keys back to linear keys to show you another type of keys. In order to change the keys to linear, it is enough to hold down the control and click on the keys once. Now our keys have turned into linear ones again. Let's try to put a new type of keys. I select the first key, right-click on it and select the Easy Out key. I select the second key, right-click, and here I put the key from in. On the graph, these keys are exactly the same if we had two soft keys. The only difference is that if we put the key again, we will animate our wheel, then the key after such a key is put linear. To be honest, I use these keys more often. Well, I don't know, because, firstly, I'm so used to it, and secondly, they more visually clearly show the beginning and end of the animation with their arrows. Well, plus, I want the next key to be linear, so that I can decide for myself which animation I want to see next. Here, in general, is a question of personal convenience. To begin with, you can stick the keys in 9 everywhere, and there you can decide for yourself whether you will use the keys Easy Out, Easy In, or you will use keys like most people like F9. To begin with, this is more than enough for us. But suddenly you have a free cache in your head and you want to read about it in more detail, then you can go to the Adobe Help. This whole thing is called keyframe interpolation. Hell is not for the faint of heart at all. I imagine how people used to teach AE from books. How many of these people have gone mad? History is silent. Let me read something from here. Interpolation is the process of filling unknown data between two known values. Keyframes are set to determine the value of a property at certain key points. The author effect interpolates the value of the property for all time points between keyframes. In short, did your head explode? Well, let's get back to our animation. I will delete the last key. You can select, press backspace or divide. And in order for our will to still be a little more realistic, we will bring this animation to its logical conclusion. I will go to the transformation section and put the key opposite the rotation red ion. I'll go to the end of our animation. Well, I'll change the value, let's say by 360 degrees. You can see that we have 1x here. This means that we have made a complete revolution, and instead of writing 360 here, we have a value of 1x. You can put 3x, for example. It turns out that the wheel will scroll around its axis 3 times during this time. But I'll leave 1. Let's play the animation and see what happens. In this example, you can see how linear and non-linear keys work together. The wheel itself moves along some smoother trajectory. It starts with a smooth movement, swings and smoothly slows down, while the rotation itself is uniform, which together make the animation quite unnatural. Let's fix it. Let's choose our 2 keys from the rotation and press F9. Now the animation looks much more pleasant. If we change the value of the position now, let's say we shift the graph in this way, then of course the same thing will need to be done with rotation. Hiding the graph, selecting the desired key from the rotation, opening the graph and changing our curve in exactly the same way as the position value. Nice. It looks cool. I would like you to practice a little with this, try to twist the graphs, try different keys, combine them somehow with each other, well, and achieve different results. Next, we will already use more complex key chains to create complex and cool animations. See you in the next lesson.